This is the latest workshop which the Live Comedy Association have arranged. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Nii from CIISA, and who is going to lead the session today. So I'll pass you over to her if that's okay, and I will now monitor any questions that come into the Q&A chat.
That's great. Thank you, Jeff, and thanks so much for having me, everyone. So I'm Director of Stakeholder Engagement at CIISA. It's actually my 2-year anniversary at CIISA today. So the organisation's been around for a little bit longer than that, but I've been with CIISA for just over 2 years, and I led on the development of the CIISA standards, and I'm going to talk a bit about that and a bit about the work of CIISA today. So CIISA is the industry-backed independent standards authority for the creative industries. So currently we cover film, TV, music and theatre. That's how we describe it. But when we're talking theatre, we're actually talking about all live performance. So that does include comedy. So we will potentially be looking into other creative industries in the future, but for the moment it's those ones. And our purpose is about upholding consistent standards of behaviour across the creative industries. And that's really looking at things like bullying, harassment, including sexual harassment, sexual assaults, etc., and discrimination. So why was CIISA set up? Well, you probably will be aware that there have been, repeated problems with behaviours across various parts of the creative industries, where there seems to have been sort of a lack of provision in terms of dealing with things effectively. So CIISA came about to address that gap, to hold organisations and individuals to account, and also to be that backstop where people can go where they're not seeing the recourse they should be able to see. And I'll talk a bit more about how we're switching on the service later this year, which will ensure that we're able to really be that stopgap. So in terms of CIISA and its services, first thing is setting standards. So we can tick that box. We've set our standards. They were launched actually in February of last year, and I will go through those with you in a little bit. So they were really important to make sure we had this single set of understanding of what good looks like across those creative industries, in terms of behaviours. We've been working on helping to embed that best practice, and part of what I'm doing now is to ensure that we really help organisations and individuals to embed that best practice. Once we switch on our own reporting channel, which will be later on this year, we'll then be able to start providing more detailed support, and also being able to start gathering patterns and themes so that we can start sharing insights in appropriate ways, and also to start resolving concerns. So that is about helping in terms of things like mediation, arbitration, and in the most complex of cases, investigations. Now that timing wise is a little bit further down the line, but the sequence is, get that best practice embedded, switch on our reporting channel, start providing insights and support. So when I joined CIISA, I did a lot of talking to a lot of people. I mean, I had over, several hundred organisations that I spoke to, and I put together an advisory committee. And you can see on here, there are the likes of the National Theatre, Royal Shakespeare Company, Royal Albert Hall is on here. We've got, they're across film, TV, music and theatre. And we've got some that are unions, some that are trade bodies, some that are support organisations. Attitude is Everything supports disabled workers in the arts sector, etc. And we worked with all of these organisations forensically to draft the standards, literally word by word, to go through and ensure that they worked. We also held workshops with loads of other different organisations to draft the standards, and then we took it out to consultation, had multiple hundreds of feedback on that, published it, so we know and we're confident that they're very much industry endorsed. You'll see that there's the likes of BBC, ITV on there as well. So we published the standards, as I said, in February of last year, published them in English. We've also published them in Welsh. That is our website address. So please feel free to go there. You can download them there or just have a look at them on the website, and that's the whole detail. I'm going to summarise them for you later on in this presentation. But before I do that, I thought it might be helpful to just actually, because I'm assuming that a lot of you won't have read that document, just to give you a quick outline of what's actually in the standards document. So we have a forward in there by our chair, who is Baroness Helena Kennedy. She is a really well-respected human rights barrister. She sits in the House of Lords. You might often see her on Newsnight commentating on various things. And she is a great supporter of CIISA. In that forward, she talks about all the issues that you'll be aware of in terms of the power imbalances within our industries, the insecurity of jobs, and all the reasons why there are concerns around behaviour. So that's just to set the scene. In the introduction, we talk about how individuals can use the CIISA standards, how organisations, projects and productions can use them, because they are scalable to whatever size of entity you're working in. And then we also talk about how CIISA will use those standards. And that's, as I discussed in the services, how we would use those standards. There was a page in there which I'll talk you through, which is how the creative industries workforce should feel when the standards are used in practice. And that was really our North Star when we were developing the standards, in terms of anyone working in the creative industries, how they feel when the standards are fully embedded in the place that they're working. There are some key definitions that are used in the standards, and I'll talk you through some of those, the standards at a glance and in full, and also some appendices. So this is what you'll see within the document. So how we want people to feel when the standards are used in practice. So, you know, in the terms of, for comedy, this could be at a show, it could be in a recording studio, you know, TV studio, etc. But essentially, everybody should know what the standards are. So they know what the expectations behaviourally are of them and of others that they're working with. They should also know what a breach of those standards looks like. If they are considering raising a concern, first of all, they should feel confident that if they do raise a concern with someone, that their concern will be taken seriously and treated appropriately. And also, when raising that concern, they should also feel that they know how to raise a concern. They know who to raise a concern to, and also are kept informed as that concern is being looked at. And also that there are fair outcomes that are reached at the end of it. And also, if they reflected on the experience of having raised a concern, they would be glad that they did it, and they would also feel that they would recommend other people to do the same. And also, if they were the subject of a concern, so if a concern was raised about their own behaviour, they were also treated in a fair and appropriate way, because it is really important for us to make sure that everybody involved in any concern that's raised feels that they've been treated well as well. And that was kind of our North Star when we were drafting the standards, in terms of this is how we want people to feel when they're being used in practice. So before I go on to describe them in more detail, let me just highlight a few definitions that we've got in here. The key ones are creative industries workforce. So when we're talking about the creative industries workforce, we're talking about anyone who is working in that creative industries environment. So yes, it's the talent, it's the performer, it's the technicians, but it's also security, caterers, cleaners, everybody who's working in that creative industries environment. They're all part of the creative industries workforce, and the standards apply to all of them in exactly the same way. You'll note that we've got a definition that talks about lead performer stroke contributor stroke artist, which was kind of a catch-all. It's what the BBC used to and now no longer call the talent. So that was kind of why we included that definition. But the only reason we include that definition is to say that the talent are part of the creative industries workforce. So everything we say about the creative industries workforce applies to them as much as everyone else. The other key ones in terms of people are senior leaders. So that's where you might have strategic leadership over an organisation, a production or a project. And within the standards, you'll see that in addition to those expectations of the creative industries workforce, there are additional expectations for senior leaders. There are also additional expectations for managers. And by managers, we're using it in the business context as opposed to any other form of context. And essentially, when we're defining a manager, we're talking about anyone who is responsible for hiring or engaging other people in work and or supervising that work. And what we've found across the creative industries is quite often people are promoted or get into their role based on their technical skills, their creative skills, and they've not actually had any form of what in the business world would be sort of managerial training. So they're not clear on what their responsibilities are to their team. So we define clearly what managers are, and we also set out specific expectations within the standards for managers and how they can support their teams and what's expected of them in terms of their own behaviour. Are the key definitions that are in there harmful behaviour? Well, as I mentioned, we're talking about bullying, we're talking about harassment, we're talking about victimisation, where there's retaliation if people have spoken up. We also define within the standards things like gaslighting, etc. So we have a summary of what we mean by harmful behaviour, and then in the appendices we have a lot more detail about what that means in practice. So people won't be able to say, well, I didn't realise that was bullying, I didn't realise that was harassment, because it's really clearly set out in the document. And then the final one that's really important there, and they're all really important, but for now, is working environment. So you'll see within the standards we talk about working environment a lot. And as you'll know, working environment in creative industries could be anywhere, and those lines can often be fairly blurred. So it could be an online audition, could be a rehearsal room, could be a tour bus, social work-related social event, an award ceremony, a promotional tour. It could be all sorts of different things, and they're all covered by the CIISA standards. So the behaviour on stage is this, in terms of the behaviour within a venue, is the same behaviour that we're expecting if you're having a work meeting or gathering in a hotel, for example. Okay, so moving on. Can I check if there's any questions or anything that's come up, Jeff, before I move on?
Yeah, so we've just had one. Are the standards retrospectively applied to historical claims?
It's a very good question. And the answer is that individuals will be able to raise concerns about historical activity. And it's really clear to note that in the first instance, an individual should go to the entity that they worked for. That is the first place that they should raise a concern. CIISA is the backstop, but the first place they should be going to is the entity that they worked with. And yes, it could be that they previously worked with them and they're going back retrospectively as well. Okay, so here are the CIISA standards. There's only 4 of them, so it's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So we've got safe working environments, inclusive working environments, open and accountable reporting mechanisms, and responsive learning culture. So when we're talking about a safe working environment, it's about ensuring that the environment is physically safe, psychologically safe, and safe from sexual harm. And within the standards, you'll see that how we set out the expectations for everybody, expectations for senior leaders, and expectations for managers. So if you look at the senior leaders section, for example, it states things like they should ensure that everybody that they're working with is clear in terms of what's expected in terms of safety within that environment, and that it's clearly set out in any contracts, service agreements, briefings, etc., that they provide people with relevant training and have the appropriate support workers involved in making sure that that environment is safe. So you'll see within the standards that it goes into more detail in terms of the expectations there. Likewise for inclusive working environments, and this is about enabling accessibility, so looking at things like, well, general accessibility, but also where it's legal things such as reasonable adjustments, etc. Also addressing discrimination, and also ensuring that there is dignity for everybody and that everybody is treated with respect, regardless of people's differing, ideologies, etc. So it's really clear in terms of the expectations around just treating people well, essentially. One thing I probably should have mentioned on the that contents page is at the very bottom there are appendices, and one of those appendices is relevant legislation, which is actually always being updated. So, for example, there's a new piece of legislation that's come out around the prevention of sexual harassment, and that is not just for work employers and employees. It also it relates to third parties as well. So it's actually that an organisation needs to be proactively preventing sexual harassment. So that's just one example. But within those appendices, you'll see there are examples around criminal law, equality law, health and safety legislation, and also employment law as well. So the third standard is open and accountable reporting mechanisms. And that we felt was a really important element to include within the standards. So this is within the entity that you're working, or where you have been hired by, that they should have a variety of ways for you to raise a concern. So it's not just one individual who might actually be the problem. There's a variety of ways for you to raise concerns, including an option to raise that anonymously. That will either be in-house or it might be through a third-party provider that they work with. But it's really important that people have a variety of ways to raise concerns. We found, talking to a lot of people, and by the way, I've worked in film and TV for over 20 years, we found that a lot of people were saying, if I did have a concern, first of all, I wouldn't know how to raise it. Secondly, I'm not sure that it would be treated seriously. Thirdly, it might actually be me that ends up being punished because of raising that concern. So that's why it's so important to make sure that open and accountable reporting mechanisms is part of the standards, to ensure that everybody knows they have the right to raise a concern, and that also that there are systems in place to enable them, and that also managers are supporting individuals that they were working with to if they choose to raise a concern or need to raise a concern. And then the final one is a responsive learning culture. And this is really about ensuring that everybody involved in a concern, whether it's the person who raised that concern, whether it's on their behalf or on the behalf of someone else, whether it's the person who might be accused of something or the organisation as a whole, are able to learn not just from the concerns that were raised, but also the impact of those concerns, and also the impact of how those concerns were handled. It's really important, again, to ensure that that lessons are genuinely learned. When we see it often, don't we, on the news, where something will have happened and there'll be a statement saying this was a historical allegation, lessons have been learned since that time, this is not something we'd expect to happen in the future. And then lo and behold, you see something else has been announced that's happened, and it's like, well, where were the lessons being learned, and who were they being fed back to? How was it actually being proactively looked at within that entity, whether it's a one person band or a huge organization? How are they actually checking? Also, are they checking in with people before they disappear, or are they proactively asking people, how did that go, checking in right early on as well, as opposed to sort of waiting until right at the end? So within the standards, we talk a lot about ensuring that you're really genuinely proactive in checking with people and how they are and how things are for them, and ensuring that it's at the very, very top of an entity that they're taking accountability for all of this activity. It's not, what we hear often is something happens sort of low on the ground and it never gets reported back up, in terms of, even if it's anonymous, it's never reported, so then those patterns aren't seen, and dots aren't joined.
Sorry, there's a question that's come in, if that's all right. Sorry to interrupt. Does this apply not only to educational environments in the creative spaces as well as workplaces?
That's a good question. So when we talked about the people that are in the creative industries workforce, it does include interns, and it would include if a student was working on like a tutor's own private project or something, then that would include them. What it doesn't include is within a university or an educational establishment, because that's covered by the Office for Students. So there are their own regulations around that. I am doing a lot of outreach, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, to students, because what we want them to do is to model that behaviour within their own practice, but also we want to prepare them for going out into the industry. Because something else that we hear is that young people will go out into the industry and they might be aware, they might not be aware of what's expected. And then if they see something and then the reaction to it or the way that it's resolved is incorrect, then they'll just make the assumption, oh, well, that's just the way it is. I should keep my mouth shut because clearly that's how it is. Whereas having the CIISA standards and knowing about them, they're actually able to go, actually, no, that isn't correct. That isn't how it's supposed to be. And they'll have more confidence. So the short answer is no, we're not covering education, but actually what we are doing is we're trying to educate people so that when they come out, they do know what's expected. I hope that answers the question. So let me go on to talk about what we're doing to embed the standards in practice. So we're doing what I'm calling socializing the standards, which is things like this. I'm doing lots and lots of webinars and conversations and briefings with organizations, with trade bodies, with awards bodies, with funders as well, to make sure that everybody is aware. And as I said, those education establishments, to ensure that people are really aware of the standards. We've had trade bodies, unions, etc., looking at their codes of conduct to ensure that they, for their members, are ensuring that they're meeting those standards. And we've had people looking at procurements, etc. So BBC and ITV, you might have seen that BBC last year, they did this big workplace culture review based on lots of different things that have happened there recently. And in that culture review, the recommendations which they've taken on board was to not only embed the CIISA standards within the BBC itself, but they now require and have informed everyone that they commission that they need to align with the CIISA standards as well. That's across audio and television. So every production that you're going to be seeing on TV from ITV and BBC, they're all required to align with the CIISA standards in terms of the behaviours that they are, the expectations, and also how they're managing concerns as well. So we've worked with a number of trailblazing organisations, two of which I've just mentioned, BBC and ITV, also Sky, also Edinburgh Fringe we worked with to test the standards in practice, and some others, which I'll show on a list in a moment. And what that means is we've taken the standards and we've looked with them at their existing policies and procedures and said, okay, how are these meeting the standards? Is there anything more you can do to ensure that they're fully embedded across your organisation, but also your commissioning, your procurement, etc. So we've been doing that, which is great, and that's helped us to develop some tailored practical guidance, because the CIISA standards are very much the what the expectations are, and they cover, as I mentioned, a lot of creative industries. And we do know people who move around, even in comedy. I'm sure you can name people who, started in like Fringe and then have done work in TV, have also then done work in film. Some have even done work in music as well. So there is a lot of crossover. So we're developing that tailored practical guidance, which is the how you can specifically embed the standards within your particular bit of the creative industries. As I mentioned, there's inclusion in commissioning and procurement processes, codes of conduct, etc. And also we've got organisations demonstrating their commitment through registering with CIISA, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a moment. That doesn't say that they have met the CIISA standards. It says they're committed to supporting CIISA's work and to meet the standards. They're committed to meeting the standards. So here are our list of trailblazing organisations. So as I said, BBC are in there, ITV, Sky as well. Two Cities Television is they make the production company in Belfast. They make a show called Blue Lights, which has been on recently, which we worked specifically with that production. Wales Millennium Centre, so an arts venue. There's an orchestra in there, Halley Concert Society. There's Post-Production House, interest in the kinds of things that can happen within post-production houses. Likewise, Metropolis Studios, recording studio, where you have individuals sometimes sort of working alone in a sort of small, secluded environment with very influential or high-profile artists, creatives, etc., and the different things that they need to handle, which might be late at night, etc. Royal Albert Hall is in here, and also, Sadler's Wells, Royal Shakespeare Company, etc. So yes, we've worked with this variety of trailblazers, and Fringe, of course, has been probably one of the most relevant for comedy in terms of how we've been working with the Fringe Society itself, discussing the kinds of issues that come up for the artists and venues within Fringe, and then Fringe looking at how they can make sure that they are really clear in their expectations of artists and venues, etc., in terms of what is acceptable, because ultimately, like the likes of BBC, etc., they're often the ones that people think about in terms of reputation. Even if they might not actually be the hiring entity, they do have a responsibility as well. So that's those ones we've been working with, which has been great. We're going to be putting out a report soon about how that's gone. They've loved it. It's been really helpful for them to just go through their what they do now and looking at how they could do things differently. We've also had them talking to each other as well in terms of peer learning, which is something we want to continue with our registered organisations as well. Because it's just different things in different, like TV do things differently than music, etc., and they can learn from each other. So what difference do we think CIISA will make? Well, ideally, what we want to do is to be preventative. We want to help deal with issues in real time. So we want people to be able to nip things in the bud so that they don't have to escalate, because people are able to say, actually, my understanding is that we don't do that here, and that's not appropriate, etc. And it can be dealt with in a really quick way. It doesn't have to get to official concern and investigation and all that kind of stuff. It's about also providing that consistency about what's expected. As I mentioned earlier about, of course, it's not just about moving industries, but of course, it's about moving venues, moving through different organizations or different companies that you work with, and making sure that there's a consistency in terms of the expectations. It's like, okay, I understand CIISA standards. Yeah, you've got those in place. Brilliant. We want to minimize people feeling that their first port of recourse is to allege things and name people in social media, in those unregulated environments. Ideally, things should be dealt with, within the entity that's done the hiring, and that it should all be handled really well and carefully in that environment. So it's, people don't feel that they have to do something which could also be quite damaging to everyone involved in terms of defamation, etc. We want to ensure that there's trust and confidence that the industry protects its workforce. That's the key thing. It's really a sign of saying, look, the industry wants to take care of people. We know the different challenges. We know about, issues, especially, comedians. I've talked to Jeff and many others around all the different challenges that happen with comedians, and the late nights, the social environments, the accommodation, the driving, all of the things that are issues that could come up, the heckling even, if it goes too far. We want to ensure that we help to level the playing fields, especially for those smaller companies that don't have their own HR, and also for freelancers who are not covered by employment law in the same way as an employee would be. So that's really, that's probably the key area. But having said that, we've got big organisations who do have HR who have also really appreciated working with us. And also they work with a lot of smaller companies and freelancers as well. So it's been really useful. They really value us. We want to identify trends and themes. So what you'll find is once we've switched on our own reporting channel, we'll then be able to start spotting patterns. We hear often where people say, one venue knew about this sort of individual, someone else knew about it, and someone else knew about it, but no one had ever joined the dots. So things were perpetuating. So we have this fantastic data protection officer and very rigid, ultra great, security around confidentiality, etc. So when our reporting channel is switched on, we're able to gather data, and we're also able to start spotting those patterns. And then, in appropriate ways, we'll be able to start, notifying people through or organisations through standards notices to say, look, there's a problem here, there's an issue here. Let's have a conversation. Is there a way that we can actually help address this? We may, in the longer future, think about potential accreditation of important roles, and that's really duty of care roles, which are probably less relevant in comedy, but maybe, I don't know, things like intimacy coordinators, access coordinators, which could be very relevant, wellbeing facilitators, chaperones as well. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get a license to be an 18-year-old chaperone for your 12-year-old cousin, so things like that is things that we might look at in the future, especially because within the standards and the recommendations, we recommend those important sort of duty of care roles. And then the next question we'll be asked is, well, what does good look like? How do I find someone who is good? And we do have a lot of organisations we're working with, but we'll be talking to them about the extent to which some formal accreditation might be useful. But that's longer term. I think I probably said most of this already. So in terms of what we will do, it's about prevention, ideally. We will be providing advice and signposting, mediation in some cases, and early dispute resolution, again, coming a little bit later down the line, as will investigations, but only in the most serious and complex of cases, and only on invitation by the entity itself. We will be publishing, we have published our standards, but we review them at some point, and we will be sort of publishing insights on what's coming through from our reporting. What we won't do is we're not going to be investigating everything. We won't be duplicating existing HR processes or legal avenues, and we're not an appeals body for those avenues. We're not a support line in the sense of mental health support. We will signpost people to that kind of support if they need it. And we're not a union, so we're not involved in like pay agreements and things like that. We do work very closely with unions, talking about, don't want people to be bullied or forced to do things that that would be unsafe, etc. But when it comes to those kinds of payment agreements and things, that's not in our remit. That's between like the unions and trade bodies. We have been endorsed and by lots of different entities. We're in the government's creative industries sector plan as a recommendation for good work and for good working conditions within the creative industries. There's been a number of different government committees that we've been involved with as well. There's Misogyny in Music was one of them for the Women Inequalities Committee. There's another one around high-end TV and film. We work with our fellow peer regulators. The chair of the Institute of Regulators is on our board. He's also the CEO of the Standards Advertising Standards Authority, which is probably one of the most well-known standards authorities. And we've got, an advisory council. We've got a fantastic board, as I mentioned, headed by Baroness Helena Kennedy. So we've got a lot of, real support, which is fantastic, and lots of industry support as well. So just to quickly summarise in terms of CIISA registration, which is something we just switched on in April, which is a more visible way of supporting CIISA. CIISA is funded by industry, and up until this point, we've not sort of publicly sort of said who's funding us, etc. But there's like this tiered system. So there's some really big organisations that pay in quite a lot because that helps the smaller ones. So any organisation that has a turnover less than £100,000 a year in the UK would be paying like £100 a year in terms of to get that CIISA registered badge, and more, which I'll talk about. But it's something that other, as I say, standards authorities like fundraising regulators have, and it's a real clear way to acknowledge and celebrate your commitment to that good practice. It also, of course, supports all the work we do, and it gives that clarity to the workforce, to partners, stakeholders, and Department of Culture, Media and Sport that you are, that you're supporting that good work. So the registration involves you receive a registration mark, as I said, that's the one in the top right hand corner. Inclusion in the CIISA register. So we haven't yet published who supports CIISA, but we will be doing that towards the back end of this year. We'll put that on our website, and we'll just continue to update that on a yearly. Well, we'll update it as people join, and then it will just be updated yearly with the new dates in it. Also, as a registered organisation, you're paying for or helping to support all of the other materials that everybody gets, which will be e-learning materials, introductory training, sector-specific guidance, and checklists. So that's for everybody, which is great. And then there's some additional resources, which are the self-assessment tools that we've been using with the Trailblazers, template library of key documents, and the peer-to-peer learning facilitation that I mentioned. That will all be for those registered organisations. And, so individuals, any individual can just come to CIISA. There's no payment, you just, if you have a concern, etc., you'll be able to contact us, and, we'll advise you, etc. Obviously, we know that there are some individuals who own companies. They might be a producer or a promoter, etc. And in that case, they might decide that they want to register because they're there as their entity. There'll be a variety of different industry forums that we have. We love the fact that we're pan creative industries. It's great to get everybody together, but we also recognise sometimes it's useful to have forums that are specific to a specific sector, and so that we'll have those as well. And yeah, so that's all I really want to say about CIISA registration. But it's worth knowing that that's on board, and it might be that in the future people start to ask, "Well, are you CIISA registered?" in various ways. That is me. So I will stop there and see if there are any other questions that come up. And please do feel free to ask anything of any kind. If it's been really unclear, or if there's anything that you feel I've missed, or that would be great.
Thank you so much. I think that's really useful. There aren't any questions at the moment in the Q&A, but I have one, so I thought I'd ask it. Whilst maybe we get some other stuff, and then I can also update members on what the LCA is doing in terms of responding to the standards in return in terms of responding to CIISA. But my question is, and I think we discussed this previously, but just for the benefit of people on the call. An awful lot of the organisations that you cite are, and I'll use the term highfalutin, but they're, an awful lot of them are massive: Sky, BBC, ITV, etc., etc. The Live Comedy Association often uses the phrase grassroots live comedy, and our membership is representative of the grassroots live comedy sector, which is not highfalutin. It's tiny. I just wonder whether you could just touch briefly on work you've done with other grassroots sectors or subsectors. I'm thinking particularly of grassroots live music, which we often get compared to and often talk to them as well. So can you just talk a bit about how you've engaged so far with grassroots?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot. we do a lot. No, it's absolutely right. The reason, obviously, that you go for the biggies is it's really helpful to get that endorsement. I mean, to get BBC and ITV is incredibly helpful because it also means that then producers have to take notice. Likewise Royal Albert Hall and other venues, and likewise Edinburgh Fringe as well. From a grassroots perspective, it's like if they're requiring things, it's helpful. Then people go, oh, okay, what does that mean? What could that mean for me? How is that something I could take to other places that I might also be performing? So, that for us is why we do that, because we are a tiny organization. So we have to figure out the most effective way to reach the widest number of people. Having said that, yes, do recognize that grassroots is really important. And in fact, in terms of, who we really can benefit, I think that's one of the key ones. I mean, I was up at the Brits had a Fringe festival, and I was up there talking to lots and lots of artists and DJs and promoters about what we do. So we do those kinds of things quite often. We have relationships with every element of the music industry, from Association of Electronic Music, the independent managers, the producers guilds, everybody. In fact, one thing we did as well recently, because in music they have like the Music Producers Guild, but then there are also a lot of smaller recording studios. So we've actually held an event specifically around safer studios for a lot of those smaller studios, and had them all to get together and had a big discussion about the issues that were of concern for them. And we think it's really important. That's why we love coming to places like Live Comedy Association, is because we want to understand from your members how we can support them. So I mean, it's a long way round to saying that we want it to be, it's not even top or bottom, but you know what I mean? We want it to come from both. We want it to come from both ways. It's really important that we have that grassroots support, and that people are aware of it, because then they can start advocating for themselves and be feeling empowered. If they're not finding that the venue they go to or the experience they have is not meeting the standards, they can say, oh, oi, this is not, the industry has said we will not accept this. So, you're on notice, basically. So for us, it's really, we really want to be able to empower individuals through the standards. That's the key reason we're here.
Great. Thank you very much. So there's a couple of questions. So the first one, I'm not an official company, but I am a promoter who runs several regional gigs under a brand name. Can I still register to CIISA? I basically want to confirm to ACTS that I do run respectable nights.
Yeah, no, that's great. And thank you. I really appreciate you asking that question and also taking that stance as well. I very much expect that you would be able to register. If you go onto our website, there is a registration button, and you can go to that, or you can email us, and I can give Jeff the email address, but there's basically just registration@CIISA.org.uk, and you can ask that question if you'd like to ask it before doing anything. But yeah, I believe you would, in the same way that a one person music producer would be able to register. And in fact, I think it's great if you do. So.
Just to say that the LCA is thinking about when and how it will register with CIISA, and we are due to have a conversation about what that means for our members. So there might be a conversation that Nia and I can have about, if we did sign up and pay the £100, what impact that would have for our members, and also what that would mean in terms of an industry forum. So let's just see what happens in terms of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it wouldn't be me, because I don't do the sales, the registration bits, but I do know that what we're finding, which is great, is we have trade bodies that sign up on their own behalf, and then because individual entities, you then get access to things that, and also you then get to use the badge, because yeah. So that's for the registration guys to explain, but we definitely are keen to ensure that there's really good representation across comedy within our world.
Great, thank you. There's another question that's come in, which is pretty long, but I will try and make sure I read it accurately. I was wondering whether you had any input specifically around anti-Semitism. There are many reports from Jewish comedians regarding clubs booking acts who are delivering anti-Semitic material. There is also an issue with Jewish and Israeli audience members being targets for material which veers towards hate speech. Venues have not responded well when Jewish and Israeli acts have challenged them on these bookings. One example is a male comedian who made public death threats towards a Jewish female performer is now back being booked by clubs. 2 Jewish performers had their shows pulled by venues last year, and no industry body was willing to make a public statement against this. There are many examples. Obviously, this shouldn't need saying, but Jewish and Israeli performers and audience members in the UK are not responsible for any issues happening abroad.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. And this is, it is a big issue. And I've been speaking to music industry as well recently about people not being booked, Jewish bands, which is, absolutely the antithesis of what is expected within the CIISA standards, so that is a concern, and it is something that would be able to be, once we switched on our reporting channel, that is the kind of thing that would be able to be reported. And we would say the first port of call should be that entity that has not hired, etc. And of course, in some cases, it might be that the first recourse should be the law. If there's something, if a criminal offence has taken place, it's really important to make sure that is considered as a if it is the case that and a criminal offence has taken place. And also, in terms of the CIISA standards, we would expect, our venues that are registered with us, promoters who are registered with us, etc., to be ensuring that they are meeting this, that they are meeting the standards and that they are not discriminating in that way. So there would be recourse.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just one other question. So I think we've got about 5 minutes left or so. So if you have got questions that you want to ask, there will be opportunities after today to continue to have this conversation. But if you do have questions, if you can type them as quickly as you can, that would be helpful. But just another question that's come in. I'm interested in knowing if CIISA work to support Get Off live comedy or work alongside them.
Yeah, so we have we've had lots of conversations with Get Off Live Comedy, and we absolutely support what they do. And so yes, they are in the same way that Live Comedy Association. they're an organisation that we talk to and are really keen to collaborate with.
Great, thank you. Well, we'll just give people a couple of minutes if you've got questions. So I think I mentioned earlier that the LCA is, we've been talking to CIISA for the last few months or so, in putting this together, this event together, and so we haven't yet signed up, but that's a conversation that we're having at the moment. And I think we're also exploring ways in which we can promote the standards to our membership, our 1,500 members who work in grassroots live comedy across the UK. But I think the other thing that occurs to me, which I think is really important, is, there's a lot of conversations which probably everybody on this call will know about in terms of comedy and live comedy in particular being ignored, not being considered an art form, not being recognised alongside theatre, dance, film, other parts of the creative industries. And I think there's a real opportunity here for live comedy in particular to sit alongside those other art forms and creative industries. And so I think from the LCA's point of view, it's really important that we communicate these standards with our colleagues and across the sector as widely as we can, because we can't complain that we're not able to play the game if we don't play the game, right? So it's important, I think, and certainly from my point of view, I think your list of what did you call them, ambassadors or something?
There are trailblazers.
Trailblazers.
Yeah.
It would. This is not a criticism at all, but it would be great one day for comedy to be a part of those trailblazers and as part of those pictures. Because it's important that comedy is recognised as much as anything.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, the Trailblazers, I mean, that was literally like piloting the standards, and we've pretty much finished that now. And of course, we did have Edinburgh Fringe involved, so we did do a lot of talking to comedy, etc. And now that actually is sort of absorbed into, being registered with CIISA. So in terms of that experience, that's what we would hope through being registered with CIISA. So the more we can see comedy names within that list, the better.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. Okay, there's nobody, no other questions that have come in as yet.
No worries. So thank you. That's my email. Well, that's the general email address, and there's also a registration@ciisa.org.uk email address if you do have anything specific to registration you want to ask questions about.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, everybody, for sparing the time and for joining us. I think I said at the top of this that it has been recorded and we will have it available online. I'm kind of assuming that everybody on this call is interested enough in this topic in order to be here. I often say that the LCA can't do everything on its own. So we need your support to disseminate this concept, I suppose, and these standards with other people working in our world. So if you're happy to be involved in that and to support what the LCA is trying to do, then just drop us an email, which is the usual hello@Live Comedy Association email address. And we'd love to talk more about what we can do together to try and improve working conditions for people working in live comedy, because that's essentially what we're trying to do. So I'll just check. There's no more questions. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope that's been a useful session. Thank you.